Bing bong.
So when it originally came out, Squid Game was one of my favorite shows of the year. I actually thought it was one of the best TV shows, one of the best first seasons of any TV show that I had ever seen. And it was in an interesting spot because I didn't really think it was going to take off simply because I wasn't sure enough people would actually care about a show that wasn't in English, especially because the best way to watch the show is with subtitles. But to my surprise, Squid Game completely blew up. The actors were on talk shows and everybody was talking about Squid Game, and it was like set all these Netflix records and everybody watched it. Everybody was talking about it and it was amazing. And I think it kind of surprised Netflix because it seemed like they didn't really have a season 2 in the works. It wasn't something that they seemed to think was going to take off nearly as much as it actually did. And even the show's creator seemingly had written the show for just one season, but after it blew up, it seemed like, well, surely people are going to want a season 2. So they greenlit a season 2, and now it's been a couple of years, and we still haven't heard any updates about Squid Game season 2. In fact, the last thing I had seen was that the show's creator said that he had sort of a mental outline for what the second season would be, but hadn't actually written anything yet, and the show is certainly nowhere close to beginning filming, and it kind of had me thinking, like, are people still going to care about Squid Game? Like, I don't expect them to care the amount that they cared when it first came out, because I don't know if any show besides maybe Game of Thrones could maintain that level of audience devotion, like hardcore people being excited about every single new season, every single new episode that comes out for the show, even though Squid Game had eclipsed a lot of like Game of Thrones records. And I don't know, because I was thinking about myself, like, I'm not sure I'm gonna care as much about Squid Game season 2 as I did about the first season, and there are a few reasons for that. I think the first one is that, I guess spoilers if you haven't seen the show yet, but most of the people in the show die. Like, that's just the premise of the show, is that there's all these players in all these games and only one of them can win. So most of the people in the show die, and when you're looking at a second season, it kind of seemed like, well, most of the interesting characters are all dead. So I don't really know how intriguing a second season would be, especially because most of those characters are the ones that made the first season so memorable. So I was thinking about that, but then also just the fact that at the earliest, it seems like we might get a Squid Game season 2 in 2024, like late 2024, maybe early 2025, which would be a really long time between seasons when it comes to a TV show. I was thinking about a show like Succession, which has a lot of hype around it, gets a lot of great reviews from audiences and critics, and there's maybe a year and change between seasons. I mean, the schedule of TV show production usually feeds into making that new season as quickly as possible, and Squid Game, I think, to me, is sort of reminding me of what happened with Rick and Morty, where the show was way more successful than I think the people behind it thought it would be, and they didn't really have ideas going forward for more episodes or more story. And I think it kind of hurt the interest in Rick and Morty, which took like a few years to get back to some sort of like massive audience. And I'm not really sure that massive audience will ever actually be back the way it was in the first couple seasons. That's sort of what I feel about Squid Game, where, I'll tune in. I'll definitely tune in for season 2. But when you're talking about potentially 3 to 4 years between seasons, I just don't know if the vast majority of people who only watched the show because of how mainstream it went, I don't know if they're going to be back, because it kind of feels like Squid Game is going to be one of those shows where you're like, oh yeah, I kind of remember that was the one about the kids games, and then, if you lose, you die, that sort of, like, I don't know how many people who tuned in to the show because it was popular are going to be back, which is a shame, because I'm assuming season 2 is probably going to be just as good as season 1. Maybe a slight sophomore slump, a little bit of a drop off, but the quality of season 1 was so good have no real reason to think season 2 wouldn't match that. I guess I wanted to end this video by just talking about whether or not you ever needed a second season of a show like Squid Game, because I was thinking back to a show like Queen's Gambit, which got great reviews and a lot of people really enjoyed the show, but it was always introduced as a limited series. No matter how well it did, they weren't going to do a second season of the show. And if they were, maybe it wouldn't follow the same character. But the point of the limited series was that it was a concise story told over X number of episodes in one season, and when it's done, it's done. And the way Squid Game ended, it seemed like maybe it should have followed that same structure. Maybe the show should have just been one season, because you get out on top, you tell the whole story, the show has an ending. It's really not until the last few seconds of the first season that they even kind of hint at the idea that they're going to do another season of the show. And part of me looking back thinks like, maybe Squid Game should have just existed in this time capsule of one of the most incredible, engaging seasons of television that I've ever seen. And regardless of its popularity, maybe it didn't really need a second season, because whenever that season does come, I don't know how many people are actually going to tune in nearly as excited as they were for the first season of the show.